Ukraine is heading towards a strategic-scale catastrophe that could lead to the loss of its statehood, Sternenko stated, and analysts add, if the Ukrainian government and its Western partners do not change their strategic position, Russia will gradually win the war. While Ukraine is forced to concentrate its main forces on the defense of Pokrovsk, Russia is actively advancing in the south. Cities that hold strategic importance for the entire Zaporizhzhia region are under attack. People are evacuating urgently. The shelling is very frightening. Grads, KABs, drones, fiber optic cables stretch everywhere. Watch more about all this next. This is TSN.ua News with Alina Turishin. Subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Well, let's get started. Volunteer and activist Serhiy Sternenko has made a disturbing statement about the war. According to him, Ukraine is heading toward a catastrophe of strategic proportions that could lead to the loss of statehood. Under the current circumstances and without major changes not only in military leadership but also in the political approach to the defensive war, the question of when Russian tanks will enter the so-called Zaporizhzhia or Dnipro is only a matter of time, he emphasized. On his channel, Serhiy Sternenko explains, the weak saturation of infantry makes our defensive line vulnerable. Due to a shortage of personnel, parts of the front are turning into gray zones, territories that we effectively do not control. The Russians are currently unable to advance actively, thanks to the massive use of Ukrainian kamikaze drones, which are literally saving the situation right now. But, as Sternenko emphasizes, if the weather worsens, this entropy at the front becomes fully apparent. At such moments, the enemy gains tactical advantages and later may even reach the operational level. Already now we are seeing breakthroughs of 5 to 10 kilometers and infiltration tactics. If these problems are not resolved in the near future, Ukraine may face a breakthrough not of just a few kilometers, but of dozens, 30 to 50 kilometers deep, as long as the Russians have enough resources. Sternenko compares the potential scenario to the situation before the Kursk offensive operation, when weak defenses allowed Ukrainian forces to advance rapidly. He warns, if the Russian army amasses enough forces and strikes at a specific location, without changes, the Ukrainian defense may not hold. That is why the activist insists on urgent military reform. He also points out separately that Ukraine still lacks a long-term strategy in case the war drags on for years. Serhiy Sternenko reports that some Ukrainian soldiers in the Pokrovsk area have been cut off from the main forces and some fighters have already been taken prisoner. Sternenko also calls the Russian breakthrough into Novopavlivka an alarming signal, a village that was previously completely controlled by Ukrainian units. However, Russian forces took advantage of poor weather conditions and a shortage of Ukrainian infantry at the positions. The enemy carried out a small crossing, entered the village with about 10 pieces of equipment and landed troops. Due to the difficult weather conditions, their incursion was noticed too late. Ukrainians managed to destroy or damage some of the equipment, but the Russian unit still remains in the settlement. Moreover, Sternenko says the enemy actually passed through the entire village, moving into the rear of Ukrainian forces. Some Ukrainian drone operators even had to engage in firefights. And this situation is not an exception. According to Sternenko, similar breakthroughs have been happening repeatedly for over a year now. He recalls an incident about a year ago in the Pokrovsk direction, when just over 30 Russians managed to capture an entire city. The volunteer emphasizes that the operational situation remains extremely difficult and shows a clear trend toward further deterioration. Taras Chmut, the head of the Comeback Alive Foundation, also wrote about the growing strategic crisis at the front. While Ukraine is forced to concentrate its main forces on the defense of Pokrovsk, Russia is quietly but methodically advancing in the southeast. Orikhiv and Huliaipol have come under attack, cities that hold strategic importance for the entire defense of the Zaporizhzhia region. The publication The Telegraph writes that holding back the enemy in this area could be the key to Zaporizhzhia's security. Due to the redeployment of reinforcements further up toward Pokrovsk, the southeastern front remains more vulnerable, and it is precisely here that Russia is advancing most actively, in the triangle between the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions, where defense has not been an absolute priority for a long time. According to estimates by the Institute for the Study of War, Russian forces may attempt to encircle Huliaipol from the northeast and gain the opportunity for a rapid breakthrough using infiltration tactics. Moscow is striking supply lines, hunting Ukrainian drone operators, and trying to exploit weakened positions for massive attacks by small groups. Analyst Michael Kaufman warns, while the whole world is watching Pokrovsk, the main enemy pressure is actually happening in the southwest, and the pace of the offensive has only been increasing lately. According to him, the defense around Huliaipol is increasingly being breached. This direction is not a priority for either Ukraine or Russia, but the lack of forces after redeployment to Pokrovsk makes the situation dangerous. However, other experts suggest that Russia may be deliberately increasing pressure in the Zaporizhzhia region to force Ukraine to spread its resources and pull some forces away from Pokrovsk. According to Ukrainian maps, over the past 6 weeks, Russian forces have advanced about 30 kilometers here. The Russians are already present in Rivnopilia near Huliaipol. Geolocated footage was published by volunteer Serhiy Sternenko and Stanislav Bunyatov, a veteran of the 24th Assault Regiment Aidar, with the call sign Osman, writes that the capture of Rivnopilia by the Russians will critically affect the situation on the Zaporizhzhia front. After all, the elevation that was lost plays an important role in the use of UAVs against Ukraine's defense forces. Let me remind you that on November 11th, the Southern Defense Forces announced that Ukrainian units had withdrawn from the settlement of Rivnopilia in the Zaporizhzhia region to more advantageous positions. Analysts predict that it is from there the enemy will try to advance toward Varvarivka in order to partially encircle the city. Evacuation is being carried out from Huliaipol and nearby settlements, which are shelled every day. The police in the Zaporizhzhia region reported that law enforcement officers operate under the cover of military electronic warfare units and act extremely cautiously and quickly. The evacuation itself is carried out swiftly, but for those gathering people throughout the city, every minute feels like an eternity. At a certain stage, the police are replaced by volunteers in order to evacuate as many passengers as possible at once. The gathering points are determined in advance so as not to waste any time. The greatest obstacle and danger are the so-called waiting drones, which hide on the roofs of half-ruined buildings along the roads, mostly around corners, to strike unexpectedly as a car passes by. Fiber optic cables stretch everywhere. The police officers are armed with anti-drone rifles. Dozens of burned-out cars are scattered throughout the city and its outskirts. The lying down, those unable to walk, are evacuated from Huliaipol in special vehicles because the Russians have literally wiped it out with relentless shelling, making it impossible to stay there any longer. Yet more than 400 local residents still remain in the city. Law enforcement officers remind everyone that every day of delay could prove fatal. In its report dated November 16th, the Institute for the Study of War assesses the situation in the Huliaipol direction as extremely tense. Russian troops continue to advance actively and are trying to develop their offensive, applying pressure from several directions at once. Analysts believe that Russian units are attempting to isolate Huliaipol from the northeast, creating conditions for a further attack from the eastern side. Their observations indicate that the enemy is moving toward the city and toward the key Pokrovsk-Huliaipol highway, which provides a significant part of the logistics for Ukrainian forces in this area. The latest data show that after new advances, Russian units have approached Huliaipol to within almost 8 kilometers from the northeast and approximately 4 kilometers from the eastern flank. The representative of the Southern Defense Forces, Vladislav Voloshin, warned back on November 15th, the enemy's recent actions pose a real threat of cutting off supply routes, particularly the road to Pokrovsk. According to him, Russian forces are trying to break through in the direction of Varvarivka, a settlement located directly on this route, although the enemy has not yet reached it. The Institute for the Study of War also draws attention to information from Deep State, which indicates that enemy groups are increasingly infiltrating the rear of Ukrainian defenses. They note that even being 5 kilometers from the front line no longer guarantees safety, as Russian units sometimes penetrate into the rear, which indicates the seriousness of the problems on the ground. The terrorist state Russia is turning yet another Ukrainian city into ruins. This is Konstantinovka. The enemy constantly drops guided aerial bombs with massive charges on residential neighborhoods. The number of such areas near Hromova Street can be seen in the photos from the 93rd Separate Mechanized Brigade. Currently, there are 4,800 people in the city of Konstantinovka, according to the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. The statement says that evacuation from the city is still possible. However, the military state that the numerous burned-out cars at the city exits and on all main roads indicate just how dangerous and difficult evacuation operations have already become. But for civilians, staying in the city is the most dangerous option. Taking advantage of the weather, the enemy is trying to enter Konstantinovka, carrying out both infantry assaults and attempting to bring in vehicles. However, the defense forces, including the soldiers of the 93rd Brigade Kolodny Yar, are holding their section of the front, resisting the occupiers and not allowing them to get close to the city. Ukraine has found itself at a point where Western armored vehicles are no longer able to turn the situation around. Its effect is being neutralized by the rapid increase in Russia's advantage in fiber optic and other unmanned systems. This is reported by analyst Julian Rubke for the publication Bild. He says that where exactly the 17,000 mobilized each month are actually located remains a mystery to most observers and military personnel. Desertion and non-combat losses often mean that entire brigades exist only on paper. November could set a new annual record for territorial losses and Russian offensives near the major cities of Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia. It's a matter of a few months, at most 1 or 2 years. If the Ukrainian government and Western partners do not change their strategic position, Russia will gradually win the war. A terrible prospect with devastating geopolitical consequences for the entire world, the statement says. Megan Mops, the daughter of Keith Kellogg, emphasizes that Ukrainian resilience is beyond doubt. However, the political and military decisions that determine the defense of the state sometimes weaken the forces holding the front. Such decisions, she says, create so much tension within the defense system that it could lead to serious consequences. Mops believes that a just peace is impossible against the backdrop of the ongoing deterioration of the situation at the front. The current dynamics of the fighting do not bring the end of Russian aggression any closer. On the contrary, they prolong the war, expand its scale, and make it much more costly to contain. Mops considers it a mistaken belief that Russian successes at the front could create conditions for ending the war. On the contrary, they only strengthen Moscow's ambitions and make future agreements less stable and more dangerous for the United States and its allies. She also notes that the war has become an integral part of Donald Trump's political legacy. In her opinion, the president has very limited time left to apply measured pressure, ensure accountability, and change course in a way that would open the path to real peace. Otherwise, the situation will only get worse, and the prospect of ending the war will become more distant. Keith Kellogg's daughter also shared a video from the Pokrovsk direction featuring a Ukrainian combat medic from the 79th Separate Air Assault Tavria Brigade with the call sign Vitik. She wrote, "We are not ready and time is running out." And what do you think? How will events on the front develop further? Share your thoughts below this video. Stay with TSN.ua to keep up with all the news. And I'll see you in the next episodes.